All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you guys had a quick break for the middle of our session, and welcome back again. I'm sure that break was surely refreshing. And so now we would like to meet our next speaker, our VP of Engineering. He is a 3BS MIS student specializing in data science and analytics. In the previous school year, he was the AVP for backend engineering in UXHawk, was a member of the Web Engineering Committee of GDSC Loyola, and was also the CTO of Punta, a startup that didn't quite get the push through yet. This year, he is also a senior software engineer at GDSC Loyola and is currently learning blockchain development. Once again, without further ado, I would like to welcome UXHawk's very own Matthew Dizon. Hi, Matthew.
Alright, hello, thank you for the warm welcome. So, apparently I am encountering some technical difficulties for me to share my screen. So, allow my AVP na lang to share it. Ayan. So, I'll begin na lang din by introducing myself. I guess a little background as to why I got into coding. So, I just started when the pandemic started, like no March 2020. So, one main reason as to why I really got into coding is because I'm interested in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then I really find it nice to work on projects, to work with multiple people, and to actually create something that other people can see and utilize. And if I were brutally honest, I'm really interested sa like high salaries that you would get in the field of technology. So I think nawala yung screen, Jimson. Ayan, okay. Going back, I think there are some things then that I wish I knew before I started to code. For example, actually finding where to find these learning resources. Aside from that, mentors who can help you for guidance, and also remembering that there's a community to rely on. I think that's one big factor where whatever language or framework you're trying to learn, there's always a lot of documentation you could look through, and also how transferable your skills are. So regardless of what language you'd be learning right now or what framework, it's whatever you would learn is can be applied to another language or framework. So you're not stuck into a certain, or you're not limited to a certain language or framework. All right. So next slide, please. So our topic for today, we'd go over syntax and function. So right now, syntax is like the rules that define the structure of a programming language. Next slide, please. So there are things that you need to keep in mind when you try to interpret syntax as within the context of programming. So it can be daunting to think that there's so many lines of code you might think that you need to remember, that you need to always implement, but that's entirely a misconception since we don't have to remember any of it. That leads us to the next point of becoming language agnostic. So that's a great aspect as a developer since as mentioned naman earlier by Jimson, where we really don't have to memorize syntax, we're remembering logic and concepts. So what happens here is that we're like, for example, in creating a for loop or a while loop or creating variables, we don't have to remember line by line on how these are implemented, but we need to understand what for loops are used for, how they are used in certain situations and stuff like that. And the last point for syntax naman is Googling and debugging. So as a developer, your one great skill is to actually know how to Google, since Google becomes our best friend. Whenever we encounter errors, it is highly likely naman na somebody else around the world already encountered that same issue and already asked the same question. So all you have to do is look it up, look through all the answers that other people have gave solutions to that problem, and then just implement it into your own code. So Googling is a great skill to have. All right, so I guess we can go to the Google Collab link. This is just some examples of how we compare the syntax in the Python programming language and JavaScript programming language. So number one, we have printing or debugging. So in the Python code, we're using print, and then we print the string hello world. On the other hand, in JavaScript code, we're doing the same thing, but as mentioned earlier, it's a totally different syntax. So instead of using print, we're using console.log. Up next, we have functions. So in Python, when we create a function, we first type def, meaning define, and then we up next would be how we name the function. So it's similar to naming a variable. It can be whatever you want. So let's say we name it as say hello, and then we have the parentheses and then the colon, and then within that define function, we indent our line of code. So this means that our function of say hello prints hello. And then for the JavaScript code, it's similar structure where we, instead of typing define, we're typing function, and then we're naming the function as say hello again. And then the difference here is that we're also using curly brackets. And then within those curly brackets is when we print hello, where we also use console.log. Up next, we have setting variables. So in Python, it's pretty straightforward, where we just write the name of the variable and then we just print its set its value. So for example, here x is equal to hello. But in JavaScript, there are like different ways for setting a variable. For example, we write const x is equal to hello. We also have var and let. These are like different. These have different use cases, but we won't get into that for this workshop. Up next is comments. This is also a useful thing when you're developing. So a comment is a way for you to write text into code without the code actually reading it or compiling it. So it's just a way for you as a developer and to help other developers read your code. So in Python, you're simply using a pound sign, and in JavaScript, you're using 2 forward slashes. So you can see here how there are actually different ways to write code because of different programming languages. But the important thing is understanding and understanding the concepts and knowing their use cases. All right. So we will be going into our next topic. So I guess we can go back to the Canvas slides. So we're going to be discussing functions. So these are a set of instructions which are bundled together to achieve a specific outcome. So next slide, please. We're using, there are actually different pre-built functions. One great example, which was already introduced earlier, is print. So it's printing a specified message to the screen. Other functions would be map, len, range, casting, and sum. So I guess we can go back naman to the Google Colab for us to actually see what these different pre-built functions do. So for the print function, we already know what that does. So I guess we can go straight into map. So map here is actually just a little bit complex. So what it does here is that when we use map, it takes in 2 parameters. So the first parameter is I guess we can look specifically at the mapped object variable. So when we call the map function, we place in 2 parameters. So the first parameter is add. This is the add function we have already declared on top. And then the next parameter is numbers, which is a variable numbers declared on top of the mapped object. So what we're doing here is we're applying the add function to each of the numbers found in the numbers function. So we're adding 1 plus 1, 2 plus 2, 3 plus 3, and so on and so forth until it had iterated through all the numbers within the numbers variable. So as you can see, when we run the code, it's going to print out a mapped object. That's something complex na din, but what we're going to do for us to see the output is just we're going to convert the object into a list. So we're printing the list of the mapped object, and we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So up next, so that's it naman for the map function. Up next, we have the len. This was also introduced in Jimson's discussion earlier. So what you're doing here is that you're identifying how long a specific array is. So for example, the numbers variable, we have 5 different numbers, and then we simply use the len function and add the numbers variable as a parameter. Now, this is also useful, for example, when let's just say you have 900,000 items within an array. So it's not that simple to simply see the 5 numbers in comparison to what we have right now. So that's going to be useful later on. Up next is the range function. So what we're doing here is we have 2 parameters. The first parameter is the beginning number, and the second is the ending number. So we have 1 to 8, except that the second parameter is not included from the range. So we're getting the values from 1 to 7. So as you can see below, when we print the range, so we're printing 1 to 7. We immediately create a list of it. And we have another example where range actually takes 3 parameters. So this is kind of new where by default kasi the range function would increment by 1, but what we're doing now is we're incrementing it by 2. So it's getting all the numbers from 2 to 10, excluding 10. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8 for that list. So up next, another pre-built functions which were actually also introduced during Jimson's discussion, which is typecasting. So it may be important for us to set our variables into specific data types. So for example, here we have 4 variables. We have an integer, a string. We have 2 strings and an array. So first, we're converting our integer into a string. Next, we can also convert a string into a list. So what we're doing here is that each character within the string becomes its own item within the list. Up next, we're also converting a string, 18, into an integer. So this becomes useful, for example, when you're trying to add numbers together, since it is not possible for you to add an integer of 18 and a string of 18. You need to convert 18 into an integer to actually use basic mathematical operations. And then the last is converting an array to a tuple. So this is another data type where instead of making it an array, we create it into a tuple where the items within that array are immutable, meaning they can't simply be changed. So that's it for casting. Up next is the sum function. So what we're doing here is instead of creating a for loop or a while loop to get the total of each item in the array, we're simply using sum function, and it adds all the numbers from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's which is found in the variable. So doing that makes things a lot easier, especially when we have tons of values inside an array or inside a variable. All right. So up next naman, we have user-defined functions. I think we can go back to the slides. There are certain steps for us to take before to remember when creating user-defined functions. So number one, we name the functions. It's similar to variables. And then up next, we have parameters. These are the things that you would use within the function. And next would be returning values. So it's important to remember that your functions, the functions you create, can return certain values for you to be able to use later on within the rest of the code. And up next is also adding instructions. This is the whole essence of a function where whatever happens in the function is already set by you. All right. So going back to the Google Colab link, let's just run through certain examples of how we define our own functions. So first, let's just say that we want to say hello. And then, here we define it. The say hello is the name of our variable. And then the empty parentheses means that we're not taking parameters. As mentioned earlier, they are optional. And then we're returning the hello string. So right below that code is a say hello open parentheses. So what happens here is that we're calling the function. This means that we run the function and then it outputs whatever you set it to output. The next example would be where we create a function that adds 2 numbers together. So you can name your function whatever you want. For this example, we're naming it as add numbers, and then we're taking in 2 parameters, x and y. Yung parameters din naman, they're similar with variables and the naming functions where you can name it to whatever you want. You can name it to num1, num2, what have you, and then. So yeah, going on with the instructions of our function, we're returning x plus y, meaning we're adding the 2 numbers together. So these are examples of calling the functions below. So add numbers 5 and 10. So we got 15. We have 1 and 3 getting 4, and we add 4 and 9 together, so we get 13. So up next we have another function where we multiply all the numbers in a list. So for example, there is a pre-built function for sum where it gets the sum of the total of all the numbers in an array, but we wouldn't have a pre-built function for multiplying all the numbers in an array. So we can create our own function. So here we name it as multiply all numbers. It takes in a parameter of numbers, And then here are the set of instructions inside. So we set the total initially as 1. And then for every time we iterate in the numbers variable, we're multiplying the total by the current item in the array. So let's say so you can see the list of numbers below. We have 5, 9, 2, 30, and 7. So what we're doing here is we're grabbing 5 as the first item, multiplying it to 1, which is the current value of total, and then we loop that process over and over as we go through each item in the list. So up next we have 9. So since the total variable has been updated, it is now it now has a value of 5. We're multiplying 9 by 5, which gets 45. And then we do the same thing where it updates. It's now currently 45. So we multiply 45 by 2. And then as we go on and on, we get 2,700 and 18,900 as our last value for the total within this given array. So yeah, I guess that's how we define user-defined functions. I guess just like Easter egg for coding, there are different modules or libraries for you to use, which also has different kinds of functions. So let's say that we're going to import. This is one way for us to use a module or library in Python. So import random. So random has many different kinds of functions within it. So when we use these functions, we're using them as they're called methods. So as you can see here in the example, we print random.choice of grocery bag. So the grocery bag is a list with 3 items. It has apples, oranges, and grapes. And the random choice function essentially randomly chooses an item within that array. There are also other functions such as randint. It grabs a random integer within a given range. So in this example, we have 3 and 9. And the last example is it grabs a random number from 0 to 1. So I think Jimson can try to run this code just to see that it actually outputs different items with the same code. So ayan, earlier, ngayon we have oranges, and then we have 3, and then we have a whole different float. Ayan, again, Jimson had run the code. We have apples, 8, and another number between 0 to 1. All right, so that's for the random modular library. Up next is the math library. So similar syntax where we we add the module we're using, and then we type period, and then the function or the method we're calling. So here, factorial, this means that we're multiplying 5 times 4 times 3 times 2. So we get 120, as you can see below. And then that's how simple it is to actually get the factorial or the square root of these numbers just by using these pre-built modules or libraries in Python. Up next, we have time and calendar. So in time, we're using the local time function or method. And for calendar, we're using month. So in the local time, it doesn't require any parameters. So we're just, when we run the code, it grabs the current year, the current month, the day, and all the other details as you can see that's printed below. And for the calendar month function, it takes in 2 parameters. The first parameter is the year, and the second parameter is the month. So it essentially displays the calendar of that specific month and year. So yeah, that's all naman for we have went over pre-built functions, user-defined functions, and some modules or libraries that you can use to access different functions. So going back to the slides, allow me to introduce a challenge for us to go through in creating our own user-defined functions. So due to the limited time naman, I guess we'll just focus on one function. So let's try to create a quite relatively simple calculator. So we're not going to have all the different kinds of operations. So what we're doing is we're adding an input. So we have 3 parameters here. So the first input is the operand. It's either a plus, minus, multiply, or divide. And then 2 integers. So the first number and the second number. So what we're trying to do here is, so let's say we add plus, and then we have 5 and 10 as the two integers. So that means we're adding 5 and 10 together, meaning we're going to have an output of 15. All right, so I guess we can have around 5 minutes just for us to try the challenge before I would be explaining how we can actually create this calculator, the simple calculator function. All right, so as sent naman in the chat, you guys can still send in questions in the Slido if ever you would need help in solving your code. So yeah, we'll be getting back to you in a while. Feel free to also just send a chat in Zoom or anything that would be comfortable for you, and we'd be happy to help out. I guess to give a tip na lang din, this would greatly implement the control structures that Jimson had gone over earlier. So we're using if and else if statements. And then let's also not forget to call the functions below, where within these functions, we're actually adding the parameters that we'd be using. So we would add the operands and also the numbers. It would be also important to note that the operand you would be adding is a string. So you're setting it as, so for example, I'll just type it in the chat in Zoom. So for example, when you want to plus, you will input that in the, when calling it. Ayan, so in Jimson's screen naman, he's showing an example of calling the function calculator. Ayan. So this is an example when we call this function of we're adding it, and then we add 4 and 78. So yeah, this would give an output of 82. So I guess 1 more minute for you guys to try and solve it. All right. So I guess before I would be explaining the how we can create this calculator function, I'll just be sending in the chat for different links where you guys can find similar problems online. So these are like Hacker Earth, Hacker Rank, and LeetCode. They can be like they range from different kinds of difficulties naman. So you can always start with the easy problems and then just try to solve them and then work your way up. All right, so for this calculator function, what we're, as mentioned earlier, what we're really going to implement is conditionals or the control structures. So the first thing we need to do is we need to identify if the operand is equal to whatever operand was created. So let's say if it's equal to plus, then we'll do something. So what we're doing something here is we're returning the first number plus the second number. So and it's actually relatively simple where we're doing the same thing for all the other operands. So we have we still have minus, multiply, and divide. Ayan. So while Jimson is doing it naman, I guess one thing to keep in mind then is when we're creating if statements, we also need to specify that they are else if by typing elif. Ayan. So here in this else statement naman, we're identifying if it's multiply. So we're returning number 1 times number 2. And then we have the last else if statement where if the operand is equal to a divide operand. So after that, we get to divide the first number by the second number. And I think it's also really important that you guys would add or utilize the else statement. So this means that if none of the instructions or the conditions were met, for example, the operand was not plus, minus, multiply, or divide, it will simply say that there is an invalid operator. So that's essentially the code that we would have. I guess we can also remove the last return line in the function. Ayan. So this is all we need, and this is we have created a simple calculator in Python. So yeah, while Jimson is creating examples here, we run the code. So what it prints out is the last function that was called. So calculator, we have multiply, and then we're multiplying 5 and 6, which gives a value of 30. So you can try it out on your own by copying the code and calling the function with different inputs, with different operands, with different kinds of numbers. And you can experiment by creating your own different kinds of functions. We also have another challenge, which is the palindrome. But essentially, the whole idea here is you're given an input, and then you identify if its reverse is equal to itself. So it's kind of complex, but you can look it up na lang din in your own time. And then if you would want help in actually working on this challenge, you can feel free to message me or Jimson, and we can help you out naman. So yeah, that's it naman for my talk for syntax and functions. All right.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much, Jimson and Matthew. So that you have finished our workshop. We would like to commemorate this session with, of course, a group photo. So if everyone could just kindly turn on their cameras so we could all see your lovely faces, that would be super amazing. And we have a very cute small group for this afternoon. So it would be really amazing if all of us could turn on our cameras. You can just wait for you guys to kind of comb your hair or something so that we can all formally end this in a commemorative way. Of course, what online event ends without a photo, without a picture taking session? So, and I hope you really guys were able to learn even just something as little as like how to create like a variable, how to see the different syntax of Python and JavaScript. I hope you guys are able to bring home something new from our workshop for today. So yeah, and I see some people already opening the camera. So let's just wait a little bit more so that we can all have everybody here with us today. You can wait maybe just 10 more seconds and then we can take a photo. All right. Okay. All right, so I'll take the photo for this afternoon. So everybody, do give your biggest smile. 1, 2, 3. Ayan. Okay, good. Nice one, everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed this afternoon. And so again, before we all go, please do not forget to answer the evaluation form. The link can be found in our chat box. Ayan. So please do check out our evaluation form because we do want to make our succeeding events the best experience for all of you. And so again, thank you to all of you guys and to our speakers for coming, and we hope that you guys had a great time this afternoon. For the last time, I'm Keith, the Cute Heart of Mahilig Mag-Atikart from BSME, and it was a pleasure to be your host this afternoon. And so I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I hope you all stay safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming,
Thank
guys.
you.
Hope you learned a lot.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.